Good morning, everyone. Oh, sorry. Good morning. All right. Good to see everyone bright and early. My name is Al Motley. I'm the CEO and founder of Tech Academics based in Philadelphia. My background is really just being a nonprofit tech executive who decided to be an entrepreneur and support those same organizations in their tech strategy. I think one of the perspectives that's important is that we do work around advising and consulting, data science, and also product development as well, and really empowering individuals and organizations to really codify their experience and codify their work that they do and leverage technology to meet their missions and values as well. We work with teams across South America in Buenos Aires, Argentina, also in Kenya and Botswana as well, just to have a global perspective on the work and the teams that we work with as well.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us so bright and early. I think Al has stacked the audience with some ringers, though. I'm a little suspicious. So obviously, the right way to go. So we should pay more attention to what Al has to say. So good morning, everyone. My name is David Graff. I'm a vice president at Google. I run something called the Global Policy and Standards team at Google, which is about a 250-person team spread out across the world that focuses on what we call content policy. Essentially, it focuses on writing the rules for our tech platform regarding what kind of content we will allow or not allow on our platform, or the behaviors we will reward or try to discourage. These days, I do a significant amount of work on AI and AI policy, working with our colleagues at Google DeepMind around how to train the base models all the way through product development and application and deployment of some of these AI-powered products and features. So super happy to be here this morning and happy to chat even more about AI and the transformative power of AI. So Anna, hit us with your toughest questions. It's all on you. No pressure, though.
Yeah. I introduced myself. Yeah. But Wilson's here. Yeah. So I introduced myself again.
We don't need to introduce Wilson.
Yeah. So I believe, like, recently we all have been experiencing AI entering our day-to-day lives more and more. And the truth is, the more users get to experiment AI, the more excited they get about the potential of AI. The more governments get familiar with AI use cases, the more excited they get about the potential benefits AI can bring to society at its great scale. So that's why I have some questions for you. David, in your role at Google, how you define responsible when it comes to AI, and how do you see Google integrating responsible in the development process and product design?
Sure, it's a great question. So I think these days, I mean, obviously there are a lot of articles and a lot of attention is being paid to AI. So there's a tremendous amount of excitement and a tremendous amount of fear at the same time, almost in equal measures. I am cautiously optimistic about the technology and sometimes very optimistic about it. But I think the fears are real and that they need to be addressed. I think important to understanding it and important to understanding how regulators will respond to the space is just to, and we don't need to do a whole AI 101, but just to understand the essential nature of the tools, right? And what these new tools are particularly good at is discerning patterns in various complex data sets. And so maybe another way of thinking about this, not a great example, but you know the kids' puzzles, which only have 4 or 5 pieces, right? And you put together, right? Relatively easy for an adult to put together, right? We can look at it and instantly see the patterns of the pieces that you need to put together. But if you try to put together a 1,000-piece puzzle, right? It's a lot harder. You can do it over time. You can do it, but you can't just look at 1,000 pieces spread out and say like, oh, here's the pattern and how they all connect. These tools can do that. These tools can do that quickly and better than us. A 4-piece puzzle, a 1,000-piece puzzle, a 10,000-piece puzzle. It's kind of immaterial to them. We're talking sort of nanoseconds. They can look at large data sets and instantly, or close to it, see the connections, the patterns. And that's powerful. That's a powerful tool for us because we have lots of huge data sets across the world in our lives that for which we can't really see the patterns, right? It's just too complex for us. Anyone who does urban planning and you're trying to plot out traffic patterns, right? You have all these variables. What time of day are people going? Are there trucks? Are there cars? Like, What are the roads? What are the restrictions on the roads? Like, it's too complex for us to put it together. But these systems can really do that well and can give us suggestions and show us patterns and give us recommendations. But the fear is also there too, because we can't really understand exactly how they come to their conclusions because we can't process the data. So what people are really worried about is like, well, what if you start using these systems for credit reporting or use these systems for housing or for bank loans? Like, we already know there are institutional biases that exist. How can we be sure that these data systems don't reflect those biases? And so that's where I think the regulation comes in. It's a long answer to your question, where on the front end, we can think, I think, about how the rules around data and how the models are trained and how we can audit the models and how we can better understand how the models are initially trained. And then we can assess outcomes. We can do testing of outcomes to see if we feel like the outcomes are fair. So there are ways to do it. I do fear a little bit, and then I'll stop talking, that right now regulators are trying to sort of get into how these systems work. They keep going like, well, how does it work? Like, well, how does the system actually make a decision? And I've said it a couple of times, and when I'm with my GAP colleagues, they love this when I'm with them. I've said a couple of times in meetings like, hey, listen, not even the engineers understand how the systems make these decisions. Like, you're definitely not going to understand it. And so like, don't focus on that. So let me hand it over to you.
Yeah, I just want to comment a little bit on that because working on the policy perspective, I think the important thing is to make sure that policymakers, regulators, of course, they're worried about us being responsible, but we have to make sure that AI innovation, we have a path preserved for innovation. Al, you mentioned Techademics. It's focused on tech education. So I would like to hear what your thoughts on how the role of education in promoting responsible tech for the next generations of developers and designers.
I feel like the role of education is really at the forefront of what's possible in the future in trying to distill really those values and how we approach the technology approach of tools, how we approach how we're going to equate equity access to these tools, and how we're going to apply them to society as well. If you think about K-12 education in the United States, it's really focused on the prerequisite and these gatekeeping processes to get to those skills, meaning what math you're taking. Is it AP math? Is it AP sciences? Then you're getting into that technology. But you also see the side where people are just taking a skills-based competency approach to it. We're just learning how to code on your own, learning how to do AI prompt engineering, things of that nature. So that balance of is how education, if even down to the middle school level up to high school, depending on how your education system is structured, how do we actually build in some of those values, skills, and bring it from other subjects that we learn in school to actually bring those into how the technology is developed, and also the why on how people are focused on why they're actually into those sectors as well. Are you there for the monetary gains? Are you there for the to make change happen? Are you there for an entrepreneurial approach to solve a big problem in society? So education, I think, is going to be one of our secret weapons to really support the next generation of tools as well. Because I know a lot of what David's work, the policy that's shaping now is so critical to where our next 25 years is going to look like, especially with AI really pushing the envelope around international treaties, whether it be, or national Department of Education policy as well. And then how we look at the federal level and then state to state as well. So I think if education and those students who are coming out of college in the next 10 years, those people who are who are really shaping policy on an organizational level, but then also in a city level, I think if they could focus on it and make sure the curriculum is really promoting the values of it, I think it'll be great.
Thank you all. Yeah, I want to shift a little bit to diversity in technology design. David, in your experience at Google, how do you see the diversity in the product teams? How has this impacted the product outcomes? And also, I'd love you to comment a little bit on the challenges that you had in promoting diversity in the teams and in the development of products.
Sure. So, these days, diversity is a very complicated topic, at least in the United States. and I suspect across the world, because in the United States, it's very much under attack. Now, we should be clear that but what's under attack is sort of a more right-leaning concept of what diversity is and what it means to focus on diversity, and not actually what diversity is by the folks who practice it, but it still has contributed to an overall environment that makes it challenging to talk about diversity, challenging in multiple ways. In terms of it being important for policy, I mean, I think it's vitally important for policy. And one of the things that I've said to my recruiters and other folks is that for the team that I run, diversity is not a nice to have, like I like it. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. We are working across the globe. We are working on so many different issues. There's already a tremendous, problem in Silicon Valley with just the Silicon Valley bubble, right? And all my colleagues who work in Silicon Valley know this and have experienced this, where even when you're surrounded by smart people, their life experience and their perspectives generally fall into a narrow band, and it's sometimes amazing the things you have to sort of work through. So I would say when it comes to AI in particular, all right, so for many years now, even before AI, lots of folks have been talking about how the web reflects institutional biases and systemic racism and et cetera. And that makes sense. The web is just a reflection of who we all are, right? It didn't spring into existence independent of human beings. Like, it was a reflection of everybody's thoughts and content production and et cetera. So of course it reflects the institutional biases of the world. And, at Google, for years, we've been trying to figure out how we make sure that the results in search or the things that we show people are reflective of the world, but don't necessarily amplify institutional biases and problems. That's a really delicate balance, right? If we don't do anything, we are accepting to some degree, right, the institutional biases. If we do something, we're, considered super woke and regulating what people say. So trying to strike that balance is tough. In AI, it's even more important, right? These initial language models, the way they were trained, essentially, and putting aside the legality of all this because people will argue it, the simple way to think about it is they ate the internet, right? We just trained them on the internet, everything that's on the internet, right? So of course they reflect that. But now it's harder because it's a little bit like, I joke and I'll stop, but it's a little bit like you have children and you're like educating your children and they're going to school and et cetera. And then they're like 10 years old and they come and say something and you're like, where did you get that? Like, and you can't trace it back to any particular thing. It's just the sum total of their experiences so far. And the large language models are like that. So it makes it even more important up front to think about how they're trained and to have visibility into the data sets and to really think hard about the data sets and to make sure that they are diverse and representative, because you're never going to be able to sort of reverse engineer back from outcome or decision, right, to all the causes.
You want to comment? Yeah.
No, I think some of the things you're saying is really really spot on. I think for me, like, the diversity in building into the tech process is huge, whether it be on the people side, whether it be on the how you build the product. I think the most important piece that's also overlooked is user experience as well. Like, I know there's so much around, so much opportunity, and we spend so much time on our devices, on our phones every day. The people that are behind that development of that user experience and having diverse faces there, diverse experiences, diverse thoughts about how you spend your time, how you think about it, and the experience and joy you may bring from that tool or platform is really critical. I think I intentionally try to design and build a diverse team of engineers, people who do feedback research, and people who do also take a client or a nonprofit or a school through a design journey. The way you interact with that stakeholder, the way you interact with that school leader, the way you interact with that student is critical to helping them to understand how they want to tap into that experience and learn from that, or whether it's something where they're going to be disengaged. So having people that can accommodate different learning styles, different disabilities, different thoughts, different ways of doing it is really critical for that as well. More, if you think about things that are happening with like Black Twitter, that's just an experience that people created out of a technology that wasn't designed for it, right? What would be the power if it was actually intentionally designed for that use case? And how would that amplify either the revenue side and then actually push the envelope on the policy side as well? So I love the thought about how diversifying that approach is really critical to the bottom line and also for some of the societal values of it as well.
Yeah, and from your perspective at academics, what do you see as the barriers for underrepresented groups that are to enter the tech field, and how do you see how we could overcome those barriers?
Yes, it's tough because on one hand, there's so much institutional structures that are barriers to really get in the traditional education system. There's also, on the other hand, these things like how YouTube and other platforms like that are being used to really get people this specific skills on demand, however they want to get them, right? So being in that between, you're seeing how so many demographics of people who have been challenged in the past are actually breaking through those barriers. The problem is that there's so many traditional academic structures that are stopping certain skills to be done to support this work. I think some of those things, those barriers are being overcome because there's certain good models where people are just going for skills. I'm sure the way y'all hire different roles at Google, we're seeing it on the small and medium-sized business side where people are really coming in and learning the soft skills and their emotional intelligence skills to really bring that to technology, using that as an entree to force their way into the access to the technology as well. So I think the barriers are changing around the education system, to get back to your question. And the second thing I think is also people being able to really equate and understand why am I going to school, and then what's the value of the potential opportunity and career. Those things have been disconnected from an academic standpoint from the basis of just, American K-12 education. So that barrier is the one thing that's going to be changing.
Thank you. Yeah, David, if you want, on that note, it made me think of the Googlers that we have here and how they're part of one of those attempts to overcome those barriers. We have here a few interns from the Next Step program, which is a program designed by the Google Brazil team. To foster.
It's a superstar program for our superstar interns at Google. Yeah, it's a great program, and it is and it's a good question. I agree with everything that Al said. I mean, there are the challenges that we all face historically in trying to get access to certain spaces, right, that haven't been particularly open for us, and access to spaces that require certain types of historically at least educational backgrounds or certifications or et cetera that have also not historically been open. I do see some promise here and some unique opportunities in the tech space. And I think there are maybe two or three. One is there are so many now really high quality educational programs that provide certifications which are valid and are recognized. And I'm not saying it's the same as a Harvard degree, but it's definitely worth a lot, right? That people can access for free. Like I've taken a few like edX courses. It's a program, right? And it's like, listen, they're either free or it's about like $99 or $199 for a certificate. So I'm not saying it's zero cost, but high quality stuff that you can do on your own that actually really gives you specific knowledge and credentials, and that's open to everyone. And I do see in Silicon Valley, now this is not applied equally, to be fair, but I do see in Silicon Valley, like people don't always prioritize the traditional educational paths in the same way that they do in, I mean, you want to go work in finance, right? They're still very locked into this sort of path, right? I'm a lawyer. You want to go to a law firm, they can be really locked in to a particular type of thing. But in tech, like people are starting to look out across a broader ecosystem of certifications and education requirements and not get as fixated on sort of where you went to school. There's still a lot of that. we had an engineer who did a podcast. He's kind of a crazy guy, but I admired him for saying this because he never went to college. He was in the Army. He got dishonorably discharged from the Army, in his opinion, for refusing to comply with unlawful order. He spent 9 months in federal penitentiary. Then he got hired at Google as a software engineer. And so he was, and he's a very successful software engineer. And so they were asking him, and they're basically like, so like you're a felon and like you got hired. And he had to his credit, he had a long pause and he said, well, it helps to be super white. Like that was his quote. And after that, I was like, you're all right. Whatever else happens, at least you acknowledge that. So it's applied unequally, but my point is that there are alternative paths now. There are alternative credentials. They're actually easily accessible. And they're relevant and they help, and they can help you get a leg up. And you know this much better than I do, but this is my sort of scattering of my survey of the field.
Yeah, you two provide super complete answers. So like one of the questions that I had here, I think we already answered. I'll jump into the next one. Looking towards the future, what key trends or innovations in tech do you believe will further highlight the need of responsible tech and diverse designers?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think as we move forward, I'm really excited about where we are right now. I think the fact that people are asking these tough questions about policy, data, what is AI going to do, what is it not going to do, where are the fears, is really an exciting conversation. I think we weren't having some of these conversations in the late 90s when people were getting online and the internet was coming. So I think we're in this specific policy / economic type of point in history that some really key decisions are going to be made. And then I think it's going to be messy. It's going to be a little bit challenging, but it's actually going to create so many different opportunities, I think, for a lot of left out people from the past because of just the use and the way things are going with AI. Where access to information is just going to drive content, drive opportunity in a way that's going to be changing. I'm excited about how that can happen with devices, our mobile device, and what's it going to look like across the world. I'm seeing people and teams and my colleagues in Botswana where they're just doing these mobile app AI hacks and trying to do things to really create this next generation of tools that are going to be leveraged all over the world, hopefully. But it's exciting because this opportunity is really going to be about really socially freeing for a lot of people to make sure that we can build the next stage and level of entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah, I very much agree. I'm excited and optimistic about these technological developments. They are complicated, and it's incumbent upon all of us to try to learn more about them. But I do think we're getting to a point where when these tools, and this is probably only a couple of years out, right, as they become more and more powerful, more and more ubiquitous, it's going to be this interesting shift back to people who have the more traditional liberal arts degree and actually have competency across broader disciplines. We went from a period of time where it was like, it always felt like the death of the liberal arts degree, right? I have one, just to be clear. And you're like, and then it felt like, if you didn't know Java or Python, like that's it. Not saying it's bad to learn that. But I think we are moving to a new stage where these tools will do a lot of the heavy lifting that, to be honest, human beings we can do. We're not particularly good at it. It's like that 1,000 or 2,000 piece puzzle. You can do it, but they'll do that, and so that will actually allow, I think, human beings to do what we are much better at, which is the creative endeavors, making associative leaps, having knowledge across multiple disciplines and being able to piece things together in ways that are unique. So I think, taking it in a slightly different direction, the trend that I see is a trend back towards folks who have this interdisciplinary approach. And I know I can tell you at Google, I experienced this, and I think my colleagues in Gap experienced this as well. The questions that we get now are like, people are stepping back and they're like, okay, hold on, I've created this thing, but like there are all these issues with misinformation or election integrity or representation, or wait, people are using it this way, or wait, hold on, I don't understand. What do you mean I can't just use Google Translate and that doesn't give me cultural fluency in another, like, and so all those folks are turning to us and saying, oh, okay, I guess it's kind of funny. I'm trying not to laugh at them, but they're just like, I guess the world is complicated. And you're like, really? Tell me more about the world being complicated. So I see that as a continuing trend.
Yeah, totally understand government policymakers being worried about companies like Google or where companies develop an AI being responsible. But I'm also very excited about what we can achieve. Like I've been at Google for 1.5 years, a little bit over 1.5 years, working especially closely with Android. And before that, I didn't really know about all of the benefits that Android brought to democratizing access to technology and to information. And it's exciting to see that AI can even further this process of granting more access to information to more people. So this is the exciting piece of AI and exciting part of working with regulators and policymakers to make AI and technology reach more and more people, and help societies develop. So you wanna add on that, Al?
No,
Yeah.
I think, well, first of all, I'm Team Android as well. So that's it. It's great. Look, y'all will learn one day. Y'all been, there you go. No, I think that's what you said is so spot on, and both of you made great points where I talk to either clients, stakeholders, friends, and some people say I'm not a technology person or I don't leverage technology in my day-to-day. I think we're at this point where we can't say that anymore. There's no one in this room, no one on this planet can say that. I know there's access limitations to certain folks that we have to pay attention to. But we're in this special place where I think access technology and having it guide and be like a really trusted advisor that automates our life is such a critical place to really help us be more efficient. I'm really excited about the next stage of how AI can be behind the scenes. We're talking about it so much, and we're prompting it and asking very specific ways. That's not how a lot of us grew up. Leveraging technology. We're used to searching Google, being very intentional about our questions. I'm ready for AI to take that next step. And these tools, as you talked about Android, how it's behind the scenes, just really telling me what's happening, keeping me on top of things, and helping me navigate the world in a way that automates things a certain way. So then those soft skills you talk about kick in. How am I leveraging this data to make decisions? How am I maximizing my time? Because time is the most valuable asset. And so I think that's where it's exciting around how these tools would then take us to the next level from a design perspective. And that goes back to why the diverse designers have to be at the table, right? To say how we're clicking through our phones, or that if I'm spending 9 hours a day on my phone, how am I maximizing that time, and how does it bring excitement and also making me drive the work in a good way?
Yes. We do have a few minutes before the end of the panel, so I wanted to open up to questions. Okay. Yeah, I'll take the microphone over there.
Thank you so much. It's really great to see you guys. Hi, my name is Emmy. I'm actually a former Googler, so woo. But I wanted to ask a question about the ecosystem around Google, because Google is changing. Like, it's contracting in some places, expanding in others, and not everybody's going to necessarily have the opportunity to get to the source of the model, to get to those big companies. Can you talk a little bit about what it looks like to independently contract to a company like Google, to be part of the ecosystem around Google, where you can be an entrepreneur, you can independently operate, and you can start to build on the infrastructure that Google is basically creating in AI?
Great question.
We'll both start. It is a great question. So I guess a couple of things. I definitely think there are lots of different ways to engage in this space and to participate, either with and in collaboration with big tech companies like a Google or an Apple or whoever. But there are also so many other companies right now that are, engaged in this space, that are important players in this space, not just OpenAI, but like Anthropic and a whole host of other companies that are doing good work in this space. There tends to be, there tends to be this pretty extensive network, right, of people that sort of work together and collaborate. So I guess a couple of things. I would encourage anyone who wants to work in this space, there are lots of different companies out there. If the big tech companies have relatively long hiring processes, and to your point, there's contraction, expansion. If that door seems closed, there are lots of other ways to work. For example, I work with the gentleman's actually here at this conference, a smaller staffing company that I go to him specifically for talent, for policy talent. And so we've used 7 or 8, 9 people from him who have come in, some of whom I've ended up hiring, right? So there are like ways in which if you are really focused on working with some of the big tech companies, if you want, there are different doors, right? I would also say that, at least from the Google perspective, and it can be frustrating, I tell people this, but if you're really interested and you apply and it doesn't work out, apply again, and then apply again, and apply again, because the companies actually there's no stigma associated with that. I know lots of people at Google who are like, yes, this was my 5th time applying for this job. So sometimes, honestly, those companies, they kind of reward patience, even though it's frustrating. I mean, I listen, I'm telling you what to do, and I'm not sure I would have done that, so it's a little hard. But that's, I think, the deal.
Great question. So I think my experience is being an independent or a small business is really around how do I partner with Google in their suite of tools and products, right? Especially on the education side, I think we think about ways we're going to scale the work. There's no other better way in education to do that than a Google workspace and the Google platforms. It's changed actually the way from a access perspective because of the free costs and also the ease of use. A lot of people overlook the fact that the level of professional development is needed to implement those tools at scale is really at a low number. So what I've done is partner and build tools on top of that with the schools and our clients to work with Google. So a lot of it's ease of use. They make it easy from a technology standpoint through the APIs or just the documentation of ways that you can do that, even if you have, depending on the skill set of your team. But also it's just really, it's helpful no matter who you're working with, or at Google or other companies as well. The last piece I'll say is, I've also taken a route of trying to go to different routes. Google Education has been a great partner. We worked on some learning management system tools and really seeing how that team thinks about Google Classroom and how that can be an asset to scale online learning and also simplify that work across the world. My team, we have a Techademics Online Academy that's based out of Botswana. Google Classroom has permeated itself through that entire region in a way because it was just easy, efficient, and scale. So for me, it's really around partnership and then seeing how we find the best tool to permit outcomes, how those tools can work, and there could be a good partnership around scaling that work.
Good morning. My name is Marcia. I'm an entrepreneur, largest Black-owned ad agency in Pennsylvania, and Perry Media, thank you. And Google's my client. So I represent Google and PA for public relations and public affairs. So I love you guys. Thanks for renewing my contract. Over the last couple of days, I've been hearing a lot of public policy that's stemming around AI, like with Google and Meta and technology. But I haven't really heard a lot over the last few days about cybersecurity. Google, as the big gorilla in the room, how are you keeping us safe from the hackers who are taking tech hostage of school districts all over America? In Pennsylvania, in the last month or so, it's a trend now that hackers are holding school districts hostage from a cybersecurity perspective. I don't really hear Google getting hacked. How can you guys continue to protect us? Yes, public policy, but with cybersecurity and what's going on?
Sure, it's an excellent question. So I think a couple of things. First of all, I mean, we spend a considerable amount of time and money, focused on cybersecurity at Google, right? We want our products to be safe and trusted, and it's particularly if you're using like our cloud systems, for example, for large data storage and for data analysis. There's a tremendous security infrastructure that exists around that, not just in terms of, if one set of servers goes down, we have dozens of backups all over the world, so your data isn't lost. But also the advantage of that is, you have a centralized team that's focusing on defeating hackers and making sure there aren't backdoors to systems and et cetera. I mean, I think what we see with hackers, and we've seen this over the past decade or so, and so I think there have been two trends that are interesting. As many devices have become smarter and more connected, they've created many more backdoors. I mean, we've seen so many interesting issues of people getting access to major systems because they hacked into the HVAC systems, right? Which were communicating with like a central server, which were, because that's how these systems are interlinked now. So anytime you have system connectivity, like it's great, smart home, it's great, but you're creating entry points, right, for folks. And so, people know your security is only as good as your weakest link, right? And people will find that. So, what I would say is, this is, you sound very biased. I would say it's, okay, that's really biased, but I will, all right, all right. Wilson is paid to say that. He's paid to say it. Look, I would say if you're a school district with a lot of sensitive data, right, you have a hard choice to make. Like, do you want to build your own system, or do you want to go with a Google or an Amazon or a Microsoft? I'm not up here to sell something, Wilson. And because those folks have the resources to invest in security. If you want to go it alone, that's fine, but you really need to make sure that you are investing in the right systems, because hackers can be all over the country, and you can be some tiny school district. I'm from Pennsylvania. You can be some tiny school district in Pennsylvania, right? Of, 1,000 students, $5 million a year budget, which we wouldn't consider a big school district. But if you're some hacker in China that can access your system, steal your data, and extort you for $100,000, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money for the school district. Is a major incentive for the hacker. So I would say, I know people have their feelings about big tech companies and et cetera, and do what you want, but there are advantages, right, to going with one of the big folks because of the sheer amount of money that we spend on security.
Only thing quickly I'll add to that is odds are we work with so many different clients and that happens, and odds are it's not the tools and the platforms, it's the people and their processes where the vulnerabilities happen, where the ransomware happens. Someone clicked this email, someone used the wrong thumb drive. That's where the things happen. So I would say for the small businesses and entrepreneurs here, or people who protect yourself individually, really just making sure that you have the right, as a company, have the right cybersecurity insurance in place, which is hard nowadays because of elevated costs, and then also have the right professional development professionally to be able to counteract those things that happen and not click those wrong emails.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lucas. I'm a software engineer. And my question is related to not like Google directly, but like to AI and those newly used chatbots, like the most famous example being OpenAI's ChatGPT. So because it started off like scrolling the internet and feeding on human input, it was great. And I'm a user of it. But as those chat becomes all the more every day, more often used and more popular, they're starting to feed on each other. Like those chats are no longer feeding on human like input, but on chat generated input, and it's becoming an issue. And I don't know like what are the big techs and specifically Google doing to address this issue. And while we're still at it, because we're using it every day, like increasingly. What are your thoughts about decreasing like diversity or even creativity because they're like plagiarizing each other and you're all using them, so they're producing like more standardized content? Okay, thank you.
It's a great question, and a number of great questions in there. So I think a couple of things. So one thing that's interesting about these large models, and this is true in a variety of circumstances, is the more data you give them, right, theoretically, the better they can get. Now, I say theoretically because obviously if you give garbage data or data that's not very good, they can go in different directions. They don't know better from, good from bad or right from wrong. It's all about the data you're giving them. So you are right that, initially they were trained on the internet, but now people are using them, right? And so we are constantly training them, or they're learning from the interactions that they have with folks. Look, I think what we've seen in previous cases is that, those interactions are a reflection of, just the world in general. Some are really good, some are really bad. So maybe to answer your question more specifically, the way that you guard against this as you go forward is you have your, and we're doing more work on this, you have your base model, right? You have the base model, and we spend a lot of time, my team and I spend a lot of time with our colleagues at Google DeepMind thinking about how are you training this base model, right? Let's really focus on that. And what that means is even if the model has eaten the internet, right, what we can do later on, a little bit later on, is come in and do what we call some fine tuning, which I can and we do this, so I can say, okay, here are now 1,000 examples of something model that I'm telling you are good examples in this area, right? And so we do this, there's a couple of different ways to do this. We do this through human feedback. You can do this. Interesting enough, now you can have AIs train AIs too. You can actually train an AI to generate good, I can train a separate AI to generate good content that I think is good, make sure that that AI is training that, and then say, okay, now go train this one, right? Right? That's an effective way to do it. And so I think the key to understand these things is these models are not static. Like they just don't come into being. They are created, and then you can train and refine and train and refine. The challenge is it's expensive and time consuming, and people don't always want to do it. I'm not talking about us. Because it takes your best case scenario, really, on a complicated issue. It takes about 4 weeks to get one turn on a model, right, to train it. And I'm doing it like, this is like, we're working 15 hours a day, right, to try to get the right data sets in and train the model, and then actually have it run a cycle and see if what you taught it actually learned. You can think of it like school. You teach your kids, and then you give them the test and how they do on the test. Sometimes you find out you didn't actually teach all that well, right? So 4 weeks is max, is an accelerated cycle. It really takes a couple of months, right? And you got to train, and you have to have people do it, and you have to test. You're burning a lot of CPU and TPU power, so people don't always want to do it. And so that hopefully as we roll forward, the costs will go down enough. I don't necessarily think you need to train these models on the entirety of the internet, just like when we all learned how to read, we didn't read every book on the planet, right, to learn how to read, right? Far fewer. So once the cost curve comes down a little bit and the training gets a little more precise and we're able to tune these models and train them, I think you'll actually see more fundamental improvements versus kind of what you see today, which is like models saying crazy things and then people trying to do these back-end fixes and say, don't be so crazy, which doesn't really work. If you're dealing with a crazy person, you can't really say don't be crazy because they still are kind of crazy. So you really have to start at this base model layer. So hopefully that was a long answer to your question, but hopefully.
Thank you. My name is Ronaldo. I'm a professor here in Brazil and member of Meta's oversight board and big fan of Android. I've been working with open source forever, and Android is a hallmark.
I'm pretty sure Wilson paid you to say that, but that's okay.
My question is, it would be very good if you guys could comment on the Gemini suspension issue. Would be very interesting because I think that's an important issue for us all here, and would be great to hear from you guys. Thank you.
I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. Gen AI,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, the image generation.
Oh, image generation. I almost want to hand the mic to Al to start this one. So here, I'm going to collect my thoughts.
Yeah. So Gen AI and the images and creation, and also video as well, right? We're seeing that recently this week. This is a big deal because we've gotten the thing about what's happening now in this last 18 months. I have access to the tools we never had access to, and you see every few months it's accelerating at this exponential rate. That new Gen to video, I think it's Sora, I think it's called, but also what's happening and how some of these tools like ChatGPT and Gemini and others, that imaging is really an amazing thing on the technological innovation side. But also, it's really scary because it has so much disruptive potential for those sectors, for artists and creatives, for others, as far as videographers. I saw an article yesterday. Tyler Perry put a hold on his $800 million investment on his studio based on what he saw in a demo of Sora this week, right? So even though that may be an overreaction, but it actually lets you know the mindset of how people are thinking about their bottom line and what that means for how their talent, their investment across the board as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think that, first of all, this genie is out of the box, right? This tool now exists. It's only going to get better. It will be used, and if you think the movie studios aren't like looking at those tools and jumping up and down. I mean, imagine being able to create now feature-length movies, right, with cutscenes, right, that are just completely generated by AI without having to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for special effects or to a specialized studio. So these tools are going to happen. I think there are a couple of challenges with them. One is, the impact it might have on the artistic and creative community, right? So that is an open question. And I'm not just talking about like the legal questions around fair use and copyright, but the impact that this has on the creative community. Then I think the second one is just, people are very concerned about how you differentiate between authentic content and inauthentic content. What's a quote real video and what isn't a real video? Now, I think that will be addressed in the future. A lot of the big companies are getting together and looking at provenance standards or watermarking or other technological means to embed code in AI-generated images so you can detect them. But I also think, not everybody's going to be on board with that standard. And, sometimes it all comes back to the basics, which nobody ever wants to hear, but I'll say it to you, which is like digital literacy. Like whenever we are going through the world, whatever you're reading, whatever you're seeing, right? Particularly if it's something that's important to you, checking your sources, like checking where this comes from. Like maybe let me check a couple of sources. Like at the end of the day, like we don't get away from basic, kindergarten and grammar school rules, right? Right? Which is like check your sources. Don't believe everything you see. Don't believe everything you read unless you. So no one likes to hear that because it feels like you're putting the burden back on the user, and the tech companies certainly need to step up to the plate and make sure that images and video generated with AI technology have some ability to be detected at scale, and that will happen. But it's also incumbent upon all of us to be good, educated citizens, right? And to make sure that we are not fooled by things that we see.
Thank you so much for the questions, and thank you so much for answering those questions. It was great having you. I think we're being, kicked out for that.